Good Shabbos, good Yontif. To begin with, I want to look at a section of Torah, which is not the reading for the Shabbat in Sukkot. It's actually not a reading for Sukkot. The reading for the traditional reading for the Shabbat in Sukkot involves the 13 attributes of God's compassion, the second giving of the tablets, and it's a reading for Shabbat in Yontif. It occurs not only the reading of Shabbat in Sukkot, but this is a reading which gets more overlooked, but I think has so much to do with Sukkot. So I want to discuss it a little tonight, and then continue with some other Sukkot traditions. So this is from Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy chapter 8, beginning in verse 7, it says, "For Adonai your God brings you into a good land." I should back up. This is Moses talking again. Moses telling the people of Israel, Adonai your God brings you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths springing forth in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey. By the way, those are the 7 species. The honey is understood to be date honey. So that's wheat and barley and grapes and figs and pomegranates and olives and dates, a land in which you shall eat bread without scarceness. You shall not lack anything in it, a land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you may dig brass. So it's mineral rich as well. And you shall eat and be satisfied and bless the Lord your God for the good land which God has given you. Which, by the way, is why the blessing after eating, the major blessing connected with meals, is the blessing after eating. That's the long one, because it says, you shall eat and you shall be satisfied and bless the Lord your God for the land which God has given you, in that order. Beware lest you forget the Lord your God in not keeping God's commandments and God's ordinances and God's statutes, which I command you this day, lest when you have eaten and are satisfied and have built goodly houses, thick-walled houses, and dwelt within them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and your gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, beware then that your heart not be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you forth out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, and who led you through the great and dreadful wilderness, in which were serpents, fiery serpents and scorpions, and thirsty ground where there was no water, who brought you forth water out of the rock of flint, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your ancestors did not know, that God might test you, to do you good at the end. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is God that gives you power to get wealth, that God may establish God's covenant, which God swore to your ancestors as it is to this day. So it is God that gives you the power to get wealth. It is God that gives you the power to do anything. Beware lest you say, I did this all myself. I did it all by myself. I'm a self-made man. Remember that the ability to do anything is not something you did. We can think of ourselves, it's like each of us, we're a bundle of energy inside a physical body. And that energy, who knows where it comes from? Biologists have explanations of some sort, but they don't really have explanations. We don't know. If you're ever looking for any evidence, evidence for divinity is something we stopped looking for in the Middle Ages, but Abraham Joshua Heschel said that wonder itself is a gateway to religious life. And if you're looking at something to be amazed enough at, I mean, you don't have to look outside of yourself, just look at who you are, who each of us is, and our ability to do anything. The mystics talk about the human soul as somehow being directly connected to God. So you want to connect to God? Look inward, not that you're God, but that go through your own being and beyond into the infinite that is in the microscopic, into the infinite that runs through you and everything. None of us did anything to be able to get the ability to move, to do, to be. And the older we each get, the more we know we can't take it for granted either. I think I see in this section, as with so much of Deuteronomy, Moses is talking to this people after a generation that they've been wandering in the wilderness. And Moses is saying, when you get to this new place, where I'm not going to be there with you, by the way, I'm not going to be there, but when you get to this new place, and you'll be dealing in new conditions, remember your old ways. Remember what you learned out here. And when you get to the new place, you know, there may have to be some adaptation. And then that's a model for us as modern Jews, because the world changes so fast these days, that where every generation is a new condition, a new situation. So in that new situation, some things may have to adapt, but don't forget the lessons of the old. Don't forget the old ways. And I can't help but thinking, whenever we get to Sukkot, that maybe this is still a mark of the transition of our people as an ancient people, from being a nomadic people to a settled people. I've seen examples of traditional peoples who, when they, in the 20th century, when they would settle, when they would move into these modern houses, which people around them said was so much better for you. I can only imagine that type of transition of lifestyle is extremely disruptive to the social structure and to the moral structure, just very disruptive. Some of these peoples, I've seen this in Navajo country, where you'll have these traditional houses built outside of a modern house, or in Israel among the Bedouins, where they have a modern house, but they have a portable house outside of the modern house, as a way of holding on to who they are, I suspect. But I always can't help but thinking that the sukkah is exactly that for us. We were a people that wandered in the wilderness, and we are told that we build Sukkot to remember that we wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. But then we settled down. But don't forget, when you're in your thick-walled houses, don't forget, every year you're going to move out, and you're going to remember. You're going to remember those old ways, and don't forget what you learned here. It's also going to be joyful. And joy, this holiday actually is full of contradictions in many ways, because it is a joyful holiday. Yet when you look at the traditional Haftorah, for Sukkot, especially the Shabbat in Sukkot, is apocalyptic. That means a battle between good and evil, a battle between light and darkness. It's bloody. We read about, it's from Ezekiel. It's about the fighting of involving King Gog of Magog. It's There are evidently ancient traditions of apocalyptic encounter, apocalyptic battle, connected somehow with Sukkot. And there's another paradox too, which is on this joyful day, in these joyful days. However, it does say, tradition does say, Talmud does say that the world is judged on Rosh Hashanah, but the world is judged for rain on Sukkot. So there is that too. That there's always the chance that things won't go so well, which only sharpens our sense of dependency. But in addition to the joyousness that we're supposed to feel, or in contrast, we then on the Shabbat in Sukkot, the tradition is to read the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes. Emptiness, emptiness, all is emptiness, said Kohelet. What do we gain by all of our toil under the sun? It is a book which is the opposite of joyful. Every book of the Bible, it seems, has a mood. Every book is dedicated to a certain mood. So there would have to be a book like this in the Bible dedicated to this type of cynicism, nihilism. But in the conservative prayer book, now the book of Ecclesiastes is 12 chapters, and I won't read 12 chapters now. But in the book, in the older conservative prayer book, there's a 3-page responsive, so it's not even 3 full pages, of Ecclesiastes sections, kind of a summary. So I'm going to read that, and you can listen to what this book is saying. Futility, utter futility, said Kohelet. What do we gain by all of our toil under the sun? Generations come and go, but the earth remains the same forever. All streams flow into the sea, but the sea is never full. What has happened before shall happen again. There is nothing new under the sun. As wisdom grows, vexation grows. Merriment is futile, and revelry is mad. Acquiring wealth and possessions is futile. There is no real value under the sun. The wise and the foolish share the same fate. Both are forgotten. We strive after wind. For everything there is a season, a time for everything under the sun, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to laugh and a time to cry, a time to lose and a time to seek, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. God brings about everything in its time. Nothing is added or taken away. Justice and wickedness are both in the world. Humans and animals share the same fate. Enjoy your possessions, for that is your portion. Who can foresee what will come? Both oppressed and oppressors lack comfort. It would be better not having been born. Still, 2 are much better off than 1. Should they fall, one can raise the other. Be not rash with your mouth. Be not hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. When you make a vow to God, do not delay. God has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill whatever you vow. One who loves money will never be satisfied. A lover of wealth will never have his fill. This too is futility. As one came out of his mother's womb, so must he depart, naked as he came, with nothing for his toil. A good name is better than fragrant oil, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, for that is the end of every mortal. Sometimes the righteous perish in spite of their righteousness, and sometimes the wicked endure in spite of their wickedness. There is not one righteous person on earth who does only good and never sins. Sometimes the righteous are repaid like scoundrels, and sometimes scoundrels are repaid like the righteous. This too is frustration. I therefore commend enjoyment. We have nothing good under the sun except eating, drinking, and enjoyment. The same fate is in store for everyone, pure and impure, righteous and wicked, the good and the sinners. Eat your bread in gladness and drink your wine in joy, for God has already approved of your action. Enjoy life with the woman you love all the fleeting days of your life that has been granted you under the sun. Do with all your might whatever you are able to do. There is no activity, no thought, no wisdom in Sheol, where you are going. The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Bread is not won by the wise, nor wealth is won by the intelligent. Time and chance befall them all. Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it. How sweet is the light, how pleasant for eyes to behold the sun. Rejoice while you are young. Follow your heart's desire, the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will call you to account. Remember your Creator and appreciate life in the days of your youth, before the days of sorrow come and years draw near when you will say, I have no pleasure in them. And there is no end to making many books, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. To sum up the matter, revere God and do mitzvot. This applies to all mortals. God will call every creature into account for everything, good or bad. To sum up the matter, revere God and fulfill the mitzvot, for this applies to all mortals. Maybe it's like they don't want us to rejoice so much that we go so wild and go off the deep end. Maybe. We read this on the most joyful day, the most joyful festival of the year. But rejoicing with gratitude, for Sukkot is a festival of thanksgiving. We rejoice with gratitude. We also remember our fragility and even possibly futility. Maybe it's made to make us more somber and therefore more responsible. We read about futility and emptiness, meaninglessness at a time of joy. But the message is, maybe, our strength and our measure does not ultimately come from us. Just like this reading in Deuteronomy 8 said, don't think you did it. Don't think you did this with that you acquired all this wealth with your might, for it is your ability to get wealth comes from someplace else. So I thought perhaps for a moment we could open this up, and I'd like to ask what people were thinking as they were hearing these words from Kohelet. Kohelet is the Hebrew name for Ecclesiastes, because it starts off by saying, I, Kohelet, wrote this. It's one of 3 books which is said to have been written by King Solomon: Proverbs, Song of Songs, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. It said that Song of Songs, which has a lot of erotic overtones, Solomon wrote when he was a young man. Proverbs he wrote when he was middle-aged, and Kohelet he wrote when he was elderly. That's what some traditions say. Do you want to unmute? Any thoughts? I think someone is saying, I think it's appropriate that during a festival, when we move into temporary houses, we read a passage that deals with how we ourselves are temporary. Yes, exactly. Maybe that is how I was, what I was striving for. I think it's appropriate that during a festival, when we move into temporary houses, we read a passage that deals with how we ourselves are temporary.